Hi. So in 1992, I decided to leave my architectural practice and go back to grad school, what my mom called, it was a very good paying job, which was mom speak for, that doesn't make any sense, why are you doing that? But it wasn't because of any lack of ability, I hope. I was doing kinds of work that just no longer interested me. I didn't think that the city needed another hotel, another office building, another gymnasium. So what I was interested in, though, was the dichotomy of where I worked, which is as a young architect in Georgetown, and where I lived as a young African American in Northeast Washington, D.C. And those two conditions could not have been more different. What I also found was that this condition, the one in Northeast Washington, D.C., seemed to be intractable. It had a history. And usually it was a history that was unkind to people of color and communities of color. And so I didn't want to be part of that. So I went back to school to try to figure out what it was that allowed this to continue to happen. Around the same time as I was having my sort of professional crisis, hip-hop was entering into what could be arguably called the golden era. At the very least, its communal, commercial, social, political, and economic agenda was up front and center. And so hip-hop seemed to have a handle on this idea of people on the corner, urban environments, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about that. So what I found in enjoying and engaging in street poets rather than the philosophers in my PhD program was that hip-hop was creating a culture. And it was creating this culture from a perspective of taking what you are given and making a world out of it. Hip-hop was inviting people to name themselves in their own voice, in their own place, in their own time. And I figured that that was something really, really important, right? So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because this particular culture was creating a movement. And architecturally, I figured that this was something that might begin to answer those questions that I had about that dichotomy. Primarily because cultural movements always create products that reflect their values, right? And so we've seen cultural movements create architecture in the past. In the recent past, in our lifetime, early 20th century efforts to create a classless society led us to constructivism. Mid-century efforts to create a universal society led us to modernism. Late century questions about humanity and people's purpose led us to deconstructivism. So why wouldn't an effort to create a just and equitable environment not lead us to hip-hop? Luckily for me,
like 135 BPM.
someone else is mic. Okay, all right. I thought it was those cats on the corner, man. All right. We don't buy it at all. Okay, so Luckily for me, I wasn't alone in thinking that way. And so over the past 10 years or so, there have been more and more people who have begun to sort of pick up this idea about hip-hop architecture, its ability to sort of take the disposable and make it indisposable, its ability to sort of create something from nothing. And so what I'm going to show you is a few examples of how hip-hop responds to cultures and locations that are, let's say, less than welcoming. So in communities of culture, communities that are too easily positioned as environmentally determined and of little import, whose voices aren't necessarily heard, hip-hop architecture responds like the MC. It unabashedly tells a story, it controls that story, and it believes that story is worthy of form. In communities that are faced with neglected spaces, the materials and people of a city, hip-hop responds like the DJ. It mixes, remixes. It takes elements from other places and uses them and uses them creatively, sometimes unexpectedly, most of the time in ways they aren't expected to be used. All the time in an effort to find environmental and social justice. In managing the inequities of distribution of resources, those communities that are always at the end of the pipeline, not at the beginning, hip-hop architecture responds like the tagger. It's bold, but it's not braggadocious. It makes no apologies for its presence or its justice project. In unsanctioned, suspect, and culturally specific public spaces, spaces that are being appropriated, it acts like the breakdancer. Reappropriation of spaces, both physical and psychological. Places to simply breathe, to be yourself. In places where it's unexpected that passively accept cultural erasure, hip-hop acts as a teacher. It takes fundamental knowledge and flips it. Alters how you see the world and your position in it and your relationships in it. So this is what I'm calling hip-hopism for this century. If you take nothing away from this conversation, especially for designers, we typically think that our end-all and be-all is visual aesthetics, what the thing looks like, right? Hip-hop architects are looking at it differently. They are adding not just visual aesthetics, but visible ethics. It's like, what is your politics? Whom are you serving? Is it equitable? Is it just? Because it's those two in combination with each other. That's how you address marginalized communities and distressed and defranchised people. Thank you.